What's up everyone, Thralls here once again. I'm Necrotic Nick and I have an album review for you. So one that I had my eye on for this week was the latest offering from Denouncement Pyre, Forever Burning, which is an accurate description of the fucking weather out here right now. We're in the middle of a heat wave. It was over like 100 degrees yesterday. It was just in the fucking high 90s today. It just is a sweltering fucking hellhole, so this seemed like the right album to review. I am super thankful that my AC is running really well right now because literally it is so cold down here, I swear I could get fucking frostbite. But anyway, this album comes out on the 17th of this month on Agonia Records. This band formed in 2003 in Melbourne, Australia. This is their 4th full-length overall, and they actually share current and former members of Nocturnal Graves, which I went over their last album this year earlier, so kind of nice intersecting lines of blackened death metal, because that is exactly what this is. Now, I've been a fan of this band for a while. I actually have their previous 3, and I really liked their last album especially. I thought that was possibly the best one they've done yet. So needless to say, I was pretty excited about going over this one. And this one is definitely a little bit different than the last one. The opening track and title track of this is quite possibly the most different track on here. It opens up, high energy as hell, very thrashy, very kind of punky, but of course with like a black metal sort of ethos to it, of course. But it stands out as probably one of the most unique tracks because this sort of punky, thrashy vibe really isn't carried throughout the rest of the album. This kind of starts it off at a very different point that you really don't hear on the rest of the album. You do get like high energy tracks all throughout this, especially The Opposer of Light and Hung Like Swine, which are both bombastic and blasty as hell. But this is a very different opener, and again, that sort of ethos really isn't repeated very much on this entire album. There's a really nice thrashy breakdown in the song, and while there are like little periods of blast beats, most of this kind of sticks to a straight up like D beat, sort of just rowdy, sort of punky fucking formula, and then caps off with some really killer thrashy leads. But again, that really isn't carried on the rest of the album. You get down to a song like Tongues Stretched for Salvation, which is a pretty cool fucking title. That one is way more on the distant side. You hear more of that cold, black metal sound. There's some really great dissonant tremolo riffs on there and a really cool tritone accent to the main riff. That feels like more of what this album is about. It is blackened death metal per se, but it leans more heavily on black metal in terms of the overall sound. Like the guitars aren't very chunky. They're not like your stereotypical death metal tone. They have more of a black metal sound. And the production is, kind of raw, a little bit muffled. I mean, it's pretty decent. I think it isn't as good as the last one. I think there was a little bit more bite to the last one. But overall, it kind of captures more of the black metal aesthetic than it does death metal. So I'd say like, this is like 70-30 black metal to death metal, which I really don't have a problem with. Melody-wise and sort of like song construction-wise, there's a lot of stuff on here that reminds me heavily of Necrophobic, but with some earlier nods like old school Bathory, maybe a little bit of Venom in there, especially again in that first track, and then more of that very aggressive like Marduk style, especially in The Opposer of Light, which just takes off, and the riff work on there is particularly aggressive versus like a lot of this. A lot of this kind of hangs on to like a sort of a steady rhythm, like a steady onslaught of tremolo riffs, some occasional chuggy breakdowns, and kind of just an old school black metal feel, but with some occasional dips into more death metal territory like Darkness in the Eyes of Apophis. That has an absolutely way more death metal oriented breakdown toward the end, and the vocals actually take a bit of a shift there. They get a little bit lower. Most of the vocals on here are very much carried in sort of just a straightforward black metal delivery. They're very like throaty, they're very raw sounding, but occasionally you get some death metal roars in there to break it up. But most of the time, just kind of sticks to the black metal delivery, kind of, again, making this sound more like a black metal album than a blackened death metal album. Most of this is very like kind of go for the throat, immediately sort of black metal, blackened death metal. A lot of the songs tend to erupt and kind of just go right for the main riffs and just sort of explode, like keep it heavy, keep it intense. There are some tracks that do lean a little bit more on atmosphere, like Sunder the Living Temple and Burn This World and Start Again, which apparently is what Mother Nature's doing right now. But those songs kind of bring up a little bit more like epicness, especially Burn This World and Start Again. That song is the longest song on there, and I think honestly the best song just in terms of the songwriting, the dynamics. There's really cool epic lead melodies on there and excellent peaks and valleys throughout the entire song. And then Sunder the Living Temple is definitely more dark and foreboding. It's a little bit slower than the rest of the tracks, at least to start. most of these tracks break into a blast beat. Like, that's just kind of thing. You're kind of just waiting for the next blast beat. Not really an issue because I love blast beats, but this one sets the mood as a little bit more dark and creepy. Again, a lot of this kind of just comes up as aggressive and evil. Again, something I like, but I kind of like the fact that they, you know, let the mood build a little bit in tempo. Like, that one kind of got all the creepiness rolling before breaking into the inevitable blast beats and tremolo riffs that are all over this album. I guess you could count the giant reverby snare and the breakdown on Tongue Stretch for Salvation. That is a big standout moment, and that big boom sort of just echoes throughout the entire studio or giant temple they're in when they recorded this. But most of this is very straightforward, very riff-oriented, just kind of find that sweet spot and kind of maintain that speed for a while and, you know, deliver some solid, catchy, you know, aggressive blackened death metal. Hung Like Swine, I think, embodies that. It is an aggressive song, and I like the fun sort of bounciness to the main riff. It has a distinct hook to it, and it keeps that aggression up, and the more thrashy riffs that kind of pop up on there kind of remind me a lot of Angel Corpse. Now, most of this is really solid. The album kind of runs really well. It's just a little bit over 40 minutes. But I have to say, I think some of the songs feel like they're stretched out just a little bit past what they need to be. Like, it's not necessarily like meat and potatoes, but they are kind of doing a lot of the same things on a lot of the tracks, and they just feel like they stretch them out for like maybe a measure too long, or there is like a smooth transition, but a transition into something that maybe wasn't necessarily needed. And while the riffs are really good, they feel very familiar. They feel like they kind of lean heavily on their influences, which, you know, their influences are really good, so I really don't have a huge problem with that. But overall, like, this album didn't sound like incredibly fresh. It was still really good, but it felt like a lot of stuff that I had heard before just sort of rearranged on a different album. And while this does maintain like a pretty solid speed and a pretty solid level of intensity throughout, it's kind of an intensity that seems like it caps off really early on the album. Like, this is like driving 10 miles over the speed limit and acting like, well, I better be careful, I'm breaking the law here. Meanwhile, people are flying by you and your friends are looking at you. It's like, I mean, you could probably speed up just to match the speed. If you want, that'd be nice. And you're like, what, are you crazy? The law's after me, man. It's dangerous out here. It's really not. Granted, you're gonna get to your destination a little bit quicker than if you were going the speed limit, and this isn't by any means like a cruise control album, but I don't know, it feels like there could be more intense moments or more dynamic breaks. Burn This World and Start Again, I think, is the big standout on here just because I think it takes a few more chances. Like, it gets flat out epic, breaks away from all the blast beats, gets some cool gallops going. Like, this song really stood out to me on this entire one, that and the opening track being the more punky, thrashy barn burner. But the rest of this, while good, not a lot of the songs really stand out, and you have some like odd transitions that are kind of in here too. Tongue Stretch for Salvation has a weird little atmospheric break with like some distorted singing and gurgling, and it kind of just goes right back into the main riff after that. I thought that was just sort of a weird break, and it really didn't add much to the song. And then the last track, Sunder the Living Temple, has a false ending. Like, it cuts off and you get this like atmospheric break near the end of the album. Like, there's not much left of it, but still at the same time, if you heard this little like ambient noise for the rest of the album, that'd be irritating too. But all of a sudden they just pick up and start playing again and close it off like that, which to me was like, why would you even have that little middle part? Because again, that just feels like some extra stuff there. It kind of hurt the flow of the song. Like, if it wasn't there, like, or just a more brief break or something like that and went into that last little ending part, I think it would have flowed a lot better. But overall, this was a pretty solid album. Like, I mean, it was just sort of a straightforward blackened death metal album. Like, again, it feels like more of a black metal album, but there are some death metal elements to it. So overall, I'm gonna give this 3 stars. I like this. This is good, it's just not great. I think they've done better in the past, but again, this isn't bad by any stretch. Like, if you like predominantly more black metal centric blackened death metal, you're probably gonna like this. There's lots of cool tremolo melodies, there's really good leads, solid breakdowns. The death metal elements definitely seem played down, but you do get some cool punky elements and thrash metal on there, and I think the riff work on here is overall pretty solid. It just kind of hangs on maybe a little bit too hard to the influences. But at the same time, their influences, at least if I'm guessing I'm right, are pretty fucking good. I would have liked more songs that sort of broke out of the mold, like Burn This World and Start Again. I think that is the big standout on here. I love the epic songwriting. But the rest of it, while I thought it was good, it kind of got a little samey after a while, and there's just some interesting choices just in terms of like extra stuff on here. But overall, this is a pretty damn solid album, and I recommend you check it out. So, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We are also on Patreon. If you'd like to help us out there, there'll be a link down below. We are doing an Ask Us Anything thing on there. So, hey, patrons, if you haven't asked us a weird question yet, here's your chance to ask us a weird question. It doesn't even have to do anything with music or metal at all. It can just be a weird fucking question, and believe me, we will answer it because we have no shame. There's also a link down there to thrallsmetal.com. You can get one of our kick-ass shirts. And Denver Death Fest, we are done taking submissions. So after a while here, we're going to go through the bands that submitted, which I think we have a lot of them to go through. And at some point, we're going to start making lineup announcements. So definitely stay tuned for that. And of course, as always, what would the end of the video be like if I didn't thank you profusely to the point where you're probably uncomfortable? But seriously, thank you guys so much. This channel has grown well beyond anything I ever thought it would be, and it has been an absolute ball. I mean, we're doing kind of crazy stuff now. Death fests and all that shit. I don't know. But we wouldn't have got to this crazy point if it wasn't for you guys. All the comments, all the likes, everything. Thank you all so much once again, and we will catch you later.